Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our Simple Sandcarving Software webinar. My name is Mel Washington, and I'm with a company called CADLink Technology. And CADLink is the company that wrote the software for Iconics on the Simple Sandcarving Software. We're going to refer to it as S3 from here on out. But the S3 software is a real flexible software that allows you to get in and manipulate graphics without having to learn software like Corel or Illustrator. Corel, Illustrator, and Photoshop are great tools, and they're great additions to S3, but it's not necessary that you have them to be able to output artwork. So I'm just going to start off by giving you a quick tour of the S3 software. So just up at the top here, you have all of your just regular Windows menu options. Here you have what's called our smart bar. This bar is going to change depending on whatever you're doing with the software. So if you are composing text, for instance, that smart bar is going to change to show you your font size, your slant degrees, and things of that nature. But when I go back to the pointer tool, it shows me just this part of the smart bar here. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to just throw some shapes here on the screen. And as you see these shapes on the screen, you'll notice every time I'm picking something or a different shape, you're noticing that the smart bar is changing. Now, the smart bar also knows what you have on the screen and how many of what you have on the screen. If you look right here, it shows that it's rectangle number 6 is what's highlighted here. So if I hit the tab key, tab will actually tab me through each of these different shapes. So if there's, for some reason, you have a shape maybe hidden behind another shape and you want to get to it, you could do that in a couple of different ways. You could hit tab to go through all the different shapes on the screen, and you can see that there I have the hidden shape back here. I can click and move it off. Another way you could do this too, and you'll see me do this a couple times during the webinar, is I'll switch from filled mode, which is what we're calling it here, where you see the shapes filled. If I hit Alt and S, it'll also take me to what's called a line mode. So what I can do is now click it, move it out of the way, and I have my circle back out here. So you're going to find that there's going to be multiple ways to do any one thing in the software. You'll see me do the same thing 4 or 5 different ways. So what I'm going to do is take you through some of the tools that we have on the toolbar. So first of all, actually, I'm going to get back to my tour. I'm sorry. This is my workspace. And this workspace here represents where I'm doing my artwork, where I'm doing my jobs. You see this dark outline here. This is actually my page size. The page size represents my print space, what I'm going to be printing onto. If you want to change this, you can go to what's called layout and go to blank size. And when you go to that blank size, you can see that I have the page set up for 8 by 10.5. So the size of paper, or excuse me, the size of film that I'm using in my printer currently is 8.5 by 11. But because S3 doesn't go out and look at the printer margins, I put those in for myself. So I always take about a ½ inch off of each side to make sure that it's going to fit within my printer space or within the page itself. So I make it 8 by 10. And if you wanted to make this a page size that you want to use all the time and you want to save this, you can click on Advanced. And you can also add this page size to the list. So you can add it to your list and it'll be available for you to choose from whenever you like. So again, this is my workspace. These are my system tools over here on the left-hand side. This is my customizable toolbar on the top. The toolbars are customizable, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. This is my color palette down on the bottom. Typically, you're really going to just use black and white when you're using the S3 software, but you'll be bringing in artwork that may be different colors. This will help you kind of manage changing your colors. So I'll show you how we might use that just in a little bit. Over on my right-hand side is what's called my job palette. So if I have several different shapes on the screen, and those shapes happen to be different colors, so just for giggles, we're going to change the color of a couple of these. And you'll see that these pages here, or excuse me, these colors here, I'm going to see if I can minimize this annoying window. I cannot, so we're just going to have to deal with it for right now. But if you look over here, these are all the colors that are in the job currently. So great thing about this job palette is if, let's just say I had these three shapes here and I wanted to change them to black. There's some easy ways to do that. I can just drag the black here off onto each of these colors. If I hit Control Z, that's an undo. So I'm just undoing what I just did. The other way you can do this is if you have multiple shapes that are maybe the same color and you need to make this black. Instead of going through and clicking each of these individually, if they're all the same color, if you hold Shift and you click on the color itself, it's going to choose all of those colors. Then it's easy enough to just go ahead and drag your color here right onto each of these, or you can just drag it on. Let me redo that. I apologize. That window is coming up and it's a little bit distracting. So I'm going to go ahead and hold Shift, click my blue color. It's going to select everything that's blue. Then all I have to do is click the black, and it's going to make everything that's blue black. So it's a great way to choose the color of maybe any one thing and then and just make it a different color. So I'm going to go through the bottom palette. The bottom palette is just our regular standard color palette. And this is just a regular CMYK palette. It's again, it's just to really just make things easier, make the job easier. So I'm going to go ahead and take you through some of the tools that we have in S3. So along this left-hand bar here, these are our system tools. This is our selection tool, measure tool, text tool, zoom or magnification tool, our welding tools, our shape tools, our graphic edit tools, our scanning tools, and our stroke and fill tools. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to create a shape. And I'm going to start showing you how these tools work, or at least some of these tools. The most frequently used tools is what I'm going to go through. So if you look at my shape here, these shapes are what are called smart editable shapes. So you'll notice that there's a couple of different things. Right now you just see square nodes. And you see a rotation node. So if I grab this rotation node, I can rotate this job or whatever shape this is. I can hit Control Z and change that shape. If this is a smart editable shape like we have here, I can click it twice, and then you'll notice that these nodes on the side change. So I can round these off by moving these corners here. And I can give myself a bit of a frame by moving this here. Okay. So some of these shapes are smart editable, and we'll go over that shortly. But this is our choosing tool or our selection tool. And really this is just used to pick the shape we want to manipulate. Our measurement tool This measurement tool is a nice tool to use if you want to know what the size of the shape is that you're manipulating. So you do have different measurement tools that you can use. You have a dimension tool, an object tool, a draw tool, and notes tool. So you can make notes. You can measure the side of what you have here. So if I want to drag this out, excuse me, I grabbed the wrong node. You can see that this shape is 6.16 inches. If you needed to print this out for reference on your printer, you could do so. And it'll give you all of this information here that's showing up. And this shows that it's 6.45 inches. So you can print that out. It'll give you the dimensions of your shape if you wanted to know. The other way you can tell what the dimensions of your shape are just looking at the shape itself. So if I have the shape highlighted, you'll notice that right up here, it shows me what my object width is, shows me what my object height is. When you change these numbers, you see a lock here. This is proportional scaling. So if I change my shapes, or if I change my size here, if I change this maybe to 8 inches, you'll notice it's not scaling proportionately. I'll change that to 2 inches, and then I get a long rectangle. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go turn this lock back on. Then if I make this 8 inches, you notice that was 80 inches. That's a little bit bigger than the media I have. Let's go back to 8 inches. And you notice the whole thing scales proportionately. So everything right here on the screen is scaled proportionately. So let me get rid of this. So that's our selection tool, and that's our measurement tool. This is our text tool. We have different things that we can do with our text for text composition. If I click my text tool and I click here, if you look at my smart bar, you can see that my font is Arial. It's only going to be right now at 0.7 inches, so let's make it a 2-inch letter. All right, my font is going to be 2 inches high, and we can just type anything in we want. All right, so now I have my font. Because fonts are smart editable in the S3 software, if you double click this, you'll get back to your font menu where you can make some changes. I can sweep select this. I can hit the drop down for my fonts. And I can see all the fonts that I have installed on my system. So once I see that, I can click it, and it'll change the font right here on screen for you. Again, I can resize my font just by typing in here. I want it to be a 1.5 inch font. Changes it to 1.5. I can change my slant. So if I need to italicize it one way or the other, I can do that. And then one of the other things, which is kind of cool, is kerning. So I'm going to Control Z and undo this. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go find myself a script font. Let's see if we can find us a script font real fast. And you'll see I have all kinds of fonts installed here. The fonts that you can use in the S3 software are, you could use a ton of them. You can use true type fonts, open type fonts, which you would get in Adobe products, and Corel fonts. So if you have any of those fonts installed on your system, you can use those, and I will show you how to find those fonts on your system. But right now, if you look at this, it looks pretty good actually. All these letters are running together, and that's not a problem at all. So sometimes when you're doing this, you need to move these letters closer or farther apart. You need to kern them. So if I go back to the text tool and I hit this on-screen kerning button, What this allows me to do is you'll notice now that you have some different nodes on the screen. This allows me to take and change the global kerning of my letters. So if I want to make sure that they're all touching, I can do that. Maybe I need to move one letter. I can do that as well. Or maybe if it's too close, I can move it away. So you can actually do the global kerning, or you can kern individually as well. And when you're satisfied with what you have, all you have to do is just click onto the screen and it'll be ready for you. I just hit Control Z to undo and put it back the way it was. So I'm going to go over some of the other font characteristics in a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and move on down to the magnification tool. Really simple magnification tools. Zoom in. All you have to do is just choose the zoom tool, highlight the area you want to zoom into. Plain and simple. You can zoom out just by pushing the zoom out button. You can zoom to the selected object. So if you're way off over here and you want to get back to what you were working on and you know it's selected, you can click to the object. If for some reason you're way over here and it's not selected, what you can do is hit that tab key, if you remember, and it'll select the next object. And you can zoom to the selected object. So that's one way to find any artwork that may get lost in all of your design. I do it often. Zoom to sign blank. This is your blank page. So if I need to get back there, I can. And I can put my work back in there and print it. You can zoom back to the previous view. You can go to the pan state, which just makes you move around on the screen, or you can just pick a zoom percentage. These last three tools aren't used very often. The first four are used often. These are our weld tools. So if you have something like this, if I hit Alt S to show you these shapes are separate shapes, yet they're touching. If I wanted to weld them and make them one shape, all I have to do is just hit this basic weld button, and it just made it all one shape. You do lose your ability to edit text at that point, so it has now become a shape. But it is just one shape right in here, as you can see. And whatever I do to that's going to move everything. I'll Control Z to undo that so that I get back to my text state. This is an and weld. So anything that's overlapping, it's going to keep, and or it's going to delete whatever's in the middle and keep what's on the outside. Overlay weld is going to be based on whatever colors that you have. This is not going to be used very often at all for you guys. And an inlay weld, I would say those two are going to probably not be used ever. So they're here. You can experiment and play with them if you like, but likely they're not going to be used at all. We have our shape tool. Our shape tools are pretty nice. You have a lot of different shapes that you can use and a lot of different ways you can manipulate those shapes. The first one that we have is the circle. And again, if you look at the smart bar up here, it's changing based on whatever you're doing. So you have the X and Y position, which isn't all that important. We have our page size, or we have our page here, so we know where everything's going to land on the page. The circle radius. So if you had a specific radius that you had to make, maybe it's a 1 inch radius, you can change that if you needed to. And you can also change the circle size by moving the little squares here, the nodes. All right. So that's the circle. I'm going to hit Alt S so we can see the fills again. Then we have an ellipse. So circle is going to be a perfect circle. An ellipse is going to be an oval. and you can manipulate that oval any way that you see fit. And again, these are smart editable again. So if I double click it, I can manipulate that oval again. And that's node editing, and we will get back into that. But again, you can see these are smart editable shapes, and you can go back in. And I made a mistake. The ellipse is not a smart editable shape. Okay, now we have square or rectangle. This is definitely a smart editable shape. Once I have that drawn, again, I can change those corners by dragging this circle, or I can bevel the edges in and make what looks like a bit of a plaque or a sign blank. So you can use that, play with it at your leisure. We have our polygon. So if you look up at the smart window, the important part of the polygons is the number of sides that you have. So you can change the number of sides you have by clicking here. And then once you have the number of sides you have, or you want, you can still manipulate this even further with these other nodes. So if I wanted to round those edges off slightly, I can pull that node, and I can even bring it in too. So there's just different ways to manipulate this and get different shapes. All right, and then we have the star. The star, very much the same way, works a lot like the polygon. You can change the number of sides that you want, or not number of sides, but the number of points. So you can change these points. You can round off these points. And you can fan them out too if you wanted to. So again, you could get just a number of different shapes just by playing with the nodes and things of that nature. We have arrow tools, so if you want to draw simple arrows, you can. Arrow length, shaft length, you can change all of those things individually. I'm not the kind of person who could tell you what the size of something is that I want. I can just tell you what looks decent on the screen or what I'm trying to achieve. And that's what these nodes here allow you to do. They just allow you to go through and get exactly what you want just by clicking on these different nodes and moving them around. So if you notice, I have my arrow tool still selected. As long as I keep drawing that without clicking away, it'll continue to draw arrows for me. All right. And the fan tool just draws you a simple fan. And you can manipulate this in a number of different ways. All right, and then we have our free draw tool, which will allow me to draw point to point. Or my free edit tool, where I can just draw freehand. And those points don't close. So if I wanted to, I could double click this. I can move that there. I can right click. And I can close those points up. So you can see now that it's closed, you can see that it filled the whole thing in. If it wasn't closed, you see the dashes around there. That's how you know if a shape is open or a shape is closed. All right, and let's go to our arc edit. If I draw a point and hold the button down, as I draw that point, I can change my arc, move it wherever else I want it. Once I click and hold, I can change my arc again. Now I'm not trying to draw any specific size, and I forgot to give you my famous disclaimer, which I am not a designer by any stretch. I can show you how to use the tools, but when it comes to drawing great artwork, I'm usually downloading and importing things in, which I'll go over some of that for you too. So really, those are our drawing tools. And we use what are called polyarcs. Our shapes are called polyarcs, but there will be times that you want to edit these. If you're familiar with tools in CorelDRAW, Illustrator, Photoshop, they use Bezier node editing, and we can node edit as Beziers as well. So if I needed to edit this node as a Bezier node, I can do that. So if that's where you're more comfortable, you can always convert these shapes, any shape, to a Bezier, and you can go in and manipulate it as you see fit. Okay, and again, you see these aren't touching. Just so you see what I did earlier, what I did was I put these nodes right on top of each other. I right-clicked, and I joined those nodes together. And I'll go into a little bit more on node editing in a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and take all of this stuff and delete it. So part of the UI and like I said, you get used to doing things a certain way, but there are many ways to do any one thing. And one of the best things is that you'll find a number of options in these menus that you're going to use, and you can customize your toolbar to help you do those things. So if I right click on this toolbar, I can go customize, and I can create a new toolbar, and I could call it anything I want. Let's just call this one webinar. All right, so I have webinar up. And now what I can do is I can go through all of the different commands there are in the software and add the ones that I know I'm going to use frequently. So I can make my own customizable toolbar. And just keep adding all the different tools that I'm going to use. So once you do that, once you close it, you'll see my toolbar webinar. It's shown up here. And I could turn that toolbar off and on. I already do have a toolbar that I made that I call Sandcarving. And you can see that toolbar is right up here. So if I turn it off and on, those are tools that I used often. So you can see right here, I use Invert Graphics, registration mark. It should be multiple registration mark. I have the wrong one in there. And so if you want to get rid of it, you can remove it if it's not what you wanted. And I can add the one I did want. Okay. So you can just add the things that you use frequently. You can close it. And you can close this down. And you have your custom toolbar. That way you can go through and do whatever you want, whenever you want. It makes it easy for you. So the next thing we're going to go over, and I'm going to show you is we're going to get specific on some of these tools here. And just bear with me for a second. We're going to get to the next thing, which is the toolbars. One last thing about the toolbars, these are dockable tools. So if for some reason you wanted to have your text tool out where you could get to it all the time, you can bring that out onto your work surface and just click it and do anything that you would do from clicking it here. If you want that toolbar to go back to where it belongs, just click the text tool and it'll redock itself for you. You can save those toolbars. You can save your configuration. So if you go through, you can export your toolbar. You can save your toolbar profile. So if somebody gets in there, they design their own toolbar or they do some other things, you can always reload that toolbar up. If they delete your toolbars, that makes it easy for you to get back to it. Again, we went over the blank size. I set it by 8 by 10.5. I'm going to go over some setup stuff. What I do, the first thing I set up is my page size. So I do that 8 by 10.5. The second thing that I do is I go to options. I go to S3 setup and I go to general preferences, and there's going to be only one thing I change here. That's going to be where my offset is. So your offset is the X and Y by default, I believe, is 1 by 1. I set it 0 by 0, and I'll show you why I do that. I'll apply. Let's just close that. What happens when I have a duplicate of 0 by 0? When I make a duplication, it's going to duplicate directly over the top of what I had in there. So let me just bring something on the screen and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I have something like this, for instance, and I wanted to duplicate it, if I hold Control D, or if I click Control D, I don't know if you noticed it, but the flash screen or the object flashed a little bit. That was me with my duplicate. So now the duplicate was right on top. One of the nice things about the way that we can move and manipulate artwork is that if you continue to hold that control button down, you can slide that graphic out on a straight line, either up or down. I'll show you why that's important and why I like to do that. But if you start sliding it left to right, you can no longer move it up and down. Same thing when you move it right or left, or excuse me, when you move it down or up, you cannot move it left or right. So it's locked in on that axis. That comes in really handy. And again, I'll show you why that does come in really handy. That's one thing that I set up. The other thing I like to set up too is called Snap to Grid. So if I have Snap to, and I'm sorry, I don't have on Snap to Grid. If I go to Options and I go to Snap to, I like to snap it to the sign blank. And I'll show you why that's important as I start designing. Really like having a snap to blank. You can have a snap to grid, and this grid right now is at a one by one grid. You can change that grid size to whatever you want. And what will happen is your artwork will go and snap to the closest possible line to where your cursor is. But I have it just straight for moving it to the page itself. So I'm going to just go ahead and start designing some stuff. I'm sure you guys are anxious to see me some of that. So I'm going to go to my text tool. I'm going to bring some text onto the screen, and I'm going to call it, let's just say Iconics again. All right. So I have Iconics on the screen. So depending on what kind of process you're using, if you're using Rapid Mask or if you're using the R series film, the way you design is going to be a little different, one from the other. So if we're just using Rapid Mask, what we want to do is invert our graphic. So wherever the light is going to be exposed on the film, that film is going to be brittle. So what I want to do to this is I want to invert it. By inverting it, I put a frame around it. I have my Invert Graphic button right here, or you can go up to Transform, and Invert Graphic is here as well. So again, more than one way to do the single thing in here. So I'll click my Invert button. The first thing that I get is called a border offset. That border offset tells me how much around that graphic I want to use for tape, for masking tape, for instance. So I'm going to give myself a 1/4 inch around, all the way around. I'm going to make my border black, and then I'm just going to say OK. So now that it's inverted this, I'm ready to go ahead and print this on my film. So being somebody who doesn't like wasting film, what I'll do is I'll go highlight this and I'll group it. So I'll go to Layout and Group. What Group does is it makes all of these individual pieces. If I move that away, you'll notice it moved away from my text. I might accidentally grab my text and move it away. So I'm hitting Control Z to go back every time I'm moving things back where they're supposed to be. If I highlight this and then I group it, if I move one thing, everything moves with it. So what I'll do is I'll group this. And this is where I tell you it's I really like the way that the duplication works in here. Is I'll hit Control D, and now it's duplicated. I'm continuing to hold my Control button down, and then I'll just move this down to where I have just a slight overlap. And then I might highlight the whole thing and then hit Control D one more time. Then I'll move that down. It allows me to put things where I want to on the page and get the best use of my material. So what I might do is I'll Control D, duplicate that, and I'll just move it off here. You can rotate objects on the screen by clicking the handle here and rotating it. And if you look at the smart bar, you can see the angle of rotation. And you see that changing. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. If you go up here to the rotation button, if you click this, it's going to rotate in 90-degree increments. So I'm just going to make that a 90-degree rotation. I'm going to move this over to where I want. So being somebody who doesn't like any white space on my film, this is really handy to be able to do. Control D. I can move this down if it'll fit. And I didn't hit Control D. So let me hold, let's see, hit Control D, duplicate, move that down. So again, this makes it easy for you to go ahead and put things on the page without wasting space. Now, it's always just preference. Some people do like that white space in between, and it's easy enough to do that. What it does is it gives them a clearer place as to where to cut if they need to. And there you go. You can move it back. So let me get rid of all of that stuff there, and we'll go ahead and continue with the fonts. One of the frequently asked questions is, how do we get more fonts? So you have a lot of fonts on your system that you may not know about. So the best way to find those fonts, or any fonts that you find that you want to use, is by hitting File, going down to Install, and Install Fonts. So what this will do is it'll look for TrueType fonts and open fonts. And I apologize, I was wrong. It does not take in Corel fonts. What it'll do is it'll take in TrueType fonts and OpenType fonts. And it'll search your C drive for where those fonts are typically stored. They're typically stored in your font folder in Windows. And then when you hit Search Now, what it'll do is it'll look in that file folder and it'll see all the fonts that are residing there. I always recommend doing this once a month, especially if you install a lot of programs. What happens is when you install software, sometimes it does install a new font, or you'll find a new font that you've installed and maybe not made not available to the S3 software. So what this will do is it'll show you all the fonts that you have in your system. And all you have to do at this point is just install all. And those fonts instantly become available to you. If you don't know how to install a font, I can show you real quick. So let's go to somewhere I have some fonts stored. All right, so this is what a typical font file looks like. If I double click this, it'll give me a preview of what that font looks like. If I hit install, it'll install that font for me, and it's ready to go. So if I click off of here, and it's Macax. So if I click off and I go to File, go to Install Fonts, search now. There's the file there's the font that I installed. I'll search now. And then install all. I just duplicated my work there. Font installed, close that. You sweep select. And that Coma Cax, wherever it is, I can scroll down to and change that font. Another thing that you can do when you're working with fonts and you want to change this to a different font type, your recent fonts will pop up right here. These are the ones that you use the most recent. But let's just say I wanted to use a Berlin font. If I click in here and then I type in B, it's going to take me to my next available B. But if I type in BER in rapid succession, it'll take me to that first BER, and then I can just change it. So I don't have to scroll through. If I know what my font is, I could just rapidly type it in and it'll take me right down there. So that's easy enough to deal with. There's some other things you can do with text, which is kind of cool. You can fit this text to an arc. So if you want to take this text and arc it, if you go into transform, fit text to arc, you can see now that your text is on an arc. You can position it on the arc where you'd like to move it. Let me get back here. I clicked off. Let's go fit text back to arc. So I can position this where on the arc I want it. I can use this bottom node to tighten the circle in and out. And I can use the top node to do the same thing. If I want this on the inside of the curve, I can put it on the inside. And then I can put it on the bottom of the baseline there. And then I could do it on the bottom of the baseline from the top. So if you click off of there like I keep doing, what it's going to do is it's going to go to the last manipulation you had. You have to apply it to get it to stick. So that's one way of manipulating your text. You may not want your text on a curve. You may want it to follow a path. If I get my free draw tool out here, maybe I want my text to fit on that path. So one thing I could do is I can highlight my text, transform. Actually, let's see, it's been a while since I've done this apparently. So highlight both your text and your path. You can hit transform and you can fit your text to the path. Apply. And it'll fit it to path. And these are your different configurations. Text inside path, you could put it right on the path. You could take it through the path. So you can manipulate it different ways. The other thing that's really nice about this is you can still kern this too. So when you kern this, it's going to kern to the path. So if I go over here to my kerning tool, I can move this along my path. So that'll allow you to just take any shape that you want and you can kern it to your path. The other great thing about this too is if you have a shape already on the screen before you have your text, you can just compose your text right onto that to the path. So I'm going to click here, I'll grab my text. And then I can just kern my text again. And I can kern right along that path. And if you kern past it, it'll fall off. So that's how you would use your fit text to path. So I'm going to Control Z, undo, get this off the screen. I'm going to go over another thing that you can do with the weld tool is not only can you weld shapes, or excuse me, text, but you can weld shapes. So if I have a couple of shapes here, I'll Control duplicate that just because I want it to be the same thing. If I again turn off my fills, you'll hit C Alt S. If I highlight this, I'm turning the fills off just so you can see what's going on. Do my basic weld. And my poor man's Mickey Mouse, but at any rate, it works pretty good. It allows you to manipulate it, make different shapes, and really you're just bound by your imagination. Let me get rid of all of that. And let's go back over some more of the palette and using the palette in different colors and jobs. So I'm going to import a job. And if you want to know what kind of jobs you can import or what kind of file format you can import, if you hit import and you hit this drop down, you can see these are all the different file formats that you can import into the S3 software. But just to make it just a short list of the commonly used files is that you can import SVGs, TIFF, GIFs, JPEGs, PNGs, PDFs if I didn't say that already. But you could bring in just about any file format that you want. The other cool thing too is you can export out to those same file formats. So as you see here, I have my Grumpy Before Coffee. So if I'm going to use this, I need this to be in black and white, first of all. So I can resize my job. Maybe I measured my cup and it just needs this to be 3.5 inches. So the easiest way to do this is I could just drag this, drop it onto my green, all done. So now this is a black and white file. If I'm using my R series film, I can use this as a positive, just send it out, expose my film, and where you expose a film is where you're going to, where the film's going to be washed away. So that's easy enough to do. And again, if you're going to be using rapid mask and you want to invert this, all you have to do is highlight it and invert. There's my offset. I can hit Control Z, or excuse me, I can hit Control Z to undo, make sure that's what I want. I can always just invert it again. What I'll do is I'll group this so that when I make any moves, it'll move the whole thing. And as you notice, as I'm moving this job around, you notice that pink line that formed along the sides. That's my snap to. So it's snapping to the it's snapping to the page or the side blank. So now, if I hit Control Z, or excuse me, not Control Z, but Control D to duplicate, I can move these along. Wherever I want them. Try to get the best usage of my material. And then I can hit Control D again and hold my control button, move these off to the side. And then I can just add more jobs in as I like. Now, if I wanted to print this out onto my film, all I have to do is hit File, Print. By default, this preview button is unchecked. I recommend that you check that. Here are all the printers that you have installed in Windows. I'm going to go to my Epson XP 15000 printer. I'm going to hit Setup. So depending on what printer you have, you're going to have a rare feed or different feeds in your tray. You just want to make sure that it's wherever your film is, your document size, and then you have the different size medias that you can use based on whatever Windows driver or based on whatever printer that you're using. The recommended, where I get the best prints with the AccuBlack film that I use from Iconics is I take this paper type and make it the most glossy, the most high, most premium material that I can pick. So that ultra premium photo glossy paper is what I use. I change this to black and white because that's what I'm going to be printing. I tell it to make it the best quality. Obviously, turn double-sided printing off. And then when I have that, just depending on what version of or what printer you use in the printer driver, I'll actually save this setting and I call it AccuBlack. So whenever I want to print something, I'll just go ahead and click my AccuBlack and say OK. So now that I have everything set the way that I want, I just hit OK. And this shows me what my page looks like. This shows me where my job is going to be on the paper. I can always move this if I wanted to. On the page. So if I go back, I can move it to wherever I want it to. Say you already have something on your page. I've actually gone back and reused some of my film. After it's dried, I just make sure I know where the print is, and I'll go through and reprint on that same material. And it's really nice, comes in handy, and we all know that we all want to pinch as many pennies as we can. So this is a good way to get a little extra mileage out of your film. And then once I'm satisfied, all I have to do is hit print, and off to my printer it goes. There's something else that we can do with our S3 software, and that's we can take graphics that may not be vectors already, and we can vectorize them so that we can invert them. So I'm gonna bring in one of my favorite instruments of choice, the French horn. And as you can see, there's spoilers. Not only are there spoilers in this graphic, but it's a bitmap, a JPEG. So even though it looks like it's a black and white, it's really made up of thousands of colors to make that black and white. So what I want to do is get it down just to the two colors that I need so that I can use it to expose my film. So the way I could do that is if I highlight this and I come over here to my scan tools, and then I hit AccuScan, you know, this smart bar will change. I can double click the graphic and it'll do the same thing. So posterizing is reducing the number of colors in your job. So I'm going to posterize this and it's going to start a wizard. It's going to say prepare to vectorize wizard. So I'm going to say yes, I want to run this. It wants to know how big I want this file to be. It shows the original size at 0.97 megabytes. So it's not a great big file. It's pretty jagged, as you can see. I'm going to probably bring this up to 10 megabytes. 5 megabytes is usually fine, but I'm going to make it 10. I'm going to say OK. And you notice the first thing that happens is it starts sharpening up. The work. So as I move it around on the screen, you can see it redraw so that it's starting to sharpen up. And these are at the default settings. You can make the edges sharper. You can make the surface a bit smoother. You can clean up the noise that you may see along the edge there. And you could change the chroma, which will just kind of exaggerate the colors in the job. I'll do a job that has a couple different colors in it, just so you can see what that does. So once I think it's smoothed out the way that I want it, I can just say OK. And it's redrawing the graphic right now. Okay, so once it's done redrawing that graphic, it wants to know what colors do I want out of this job. It's a black and white job, so I only need black and white. So you can see that black's already chosen, but if you look a little closer, the top is my preview of my original file. The bottom is what I'm trying to get out, or what I'll get out of the vector. So you notice all those spoilers that were in there are starting to show up. I can strengthen this black to start taking over those spots. As I click here, you'll notice I'm getting rid of those things. As the farther I go, the more noise it's going to pick up and add in. So if I think I'm okay with that, I'll just go ahead and say okay. All right, so now that I have that on the screen, it's going to be, it's time to vectorize. Okay, so now that I have this on the screen, I apologize for the delay. So now I have this on the screen, it's ready to vectorize. So what I could do over here is I can look at my trace setup, which comes up next. And these are different tolerances. There's different settings that you have here that you can use. But what I'm going to use right now is some custom settings that a friend of mine gave me. They work really well. So I use a tolerance of 8, corners at 6, a speckle filter. This is where it wants to start dropping different aspects of your graphic. So if it's smaller than 8 pixels, it's going to be deleted. It's not going to be kept. This is the angle in which it's going to make sure the lines are kept at. And this is just more accuracy here. The higher the number, the more tightly it's going to try to match those edges. So what I'm going to do is say OK. And now I'm going to close this and move it away. Oops. So I'm going to move that one away. And now if I hit Alt S, you'll see which one is the drawing and which one is the graphic. And you can see it did a pretty good job on those lines. So what I'll do is I'll get rid of the original. I'll delete that. I'll highlight this. And when you do vectorization like this, what will happen is it'll become grouped. So I'll ungroup it. I'll get rid of that background that I don't need. And now I'm just left with my French horn. And then I can just go ahead. If I'm using rapid mask, I can go ahead and invert that and then start my duplication process or whatever I'm going to use on the film. I'll just place it on the film where I want it, and now I can print. Now, if you have something that's multiple colors, let's find. And all of these are actually real world graphics. These are graphics that I've gotten and I've had to manipulate as well. And I'm just going through how I did them. So again, I'll double click the graphic. I'll click on posterize. I'll go through my wizard, make that 10 megabytes. And you can already see how much is cleaning up the graphics. I'll say OK. Now where I got to choose my colors, you'll see the colors here on the screen. And you'll see my preview at the bottom. If I choose color 2, I'll add that color to the job. Because the way that this job is made, I don't really need to add that color. I can go ahead and click that off. And I can make that color white. And I can say OK. And there is a little anomaly in this job. Forgot about that. There's something the way that this job was drawn. So you'll see this little extra in here. So this may not have been the best file to use, but I'll go ahead and I'll ungroup this. I'll get rid of all this other stuff. And then this is another reason that's really nice to be able to choose your color that you want to select. So you can hold Shift, click that yellow color, and then hit Delete, and it's going to get rid of all of that. So again, this was just a bad graphic to choose from. The designer had some issues with it, but I think it gives you a general idea what you can do when you go through and you have a job of multiple colors. Okay, so the next thing I want to take you through is just reviewing on how to get these output to your printer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt S so you can see again what's on your printer screen. You can move this to wherever you want on the page. Hit File, hit Print. You have all your setup stuff here. As long as everything is set up the way you want, hit OK. Hit Print, and it'll go directly to your printer. Pretty easy. One of the really nice things that makes that this has it in is you have the ability to add multiple registration marks. So I'm going to bring a job in again. File. I'm going to import. And we're going to import our grumpy again. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this back to black like I did before. This time, I want to make sure this is lined up on my substrate right in the middle of my glass. So if you're going to blast this on the glass and you want to make sure that it's straight, if you highlight this, I'm going to group it so it all stays together. I'm going to come over to my shape tool. I'm going to come over here to what's called multiple registration mark. I also added it on my toolbar here. So if I click that multiple registration mark, right now I can put these registration marks wherever I want them on the job. And I can highlight this, invert it. So now what will happen is when I print this out, those X's will be exposed in white. So when I put it down on my job, if you're using Rapid Mask, it's going to be a dark green color. You'll see those where those crosses are, and you can line that right up to your substrate. Once you line that up to your substrate, when you mask it off, you can mask over those X's so that they don't get blasted. And it gives you an easy way to make sure that your jobs are always straight and they work well. That's actually something I just learned recently, and that was from one of the users, one of their recommendations. So it is really a nice, handy tool to use, and it helps you line up everything. So this is where I'm going to end the webinar. What I'd like you guys to do is make sure that you go to Iconic's website. If you haven't downloaded the trial yet, go ahead and download the trial. And I think that you'll like what you're going to see. If you do have any questions at all, I would like you to have you email me, and you can email me at that address there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And we'll have more in-depth and more advanced tools with the S3 software, including doing pictures and doing some more advanced stuff with the tools that we've learned today. So thank you very much. I do appreciate you guys coming by, and we'll see you again on Wednesday at the same time. Thank you.